smell the smoke. You could feel it. It smelled like something like sort of being in the center of the last burning embers of a bonfire. It felt very much like that. And now this I guess it's afternoon now, it feels a little bit more clear. But again, Leon, if you've been here for the last couple days, the air quality changes from hour to hour, from minute to minute.
Incredible. Michael Oku, thank you very much, giving us those scenes that look like they're straight from a Mad Max movie. Scenes created perhaps by a madman. Michael Oku in New York, thank you very much. All right, our coverage, our extended coverage right now, America Attacks, begins right now.
This is CNN.
And welcome back. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America Under Attack. I'm Darren Kagan.
And I am Leon Harris. Now, we want to start off this hour by bringing you up to speed on some of the latest developments in this fast-moving story. Federal authorities are casting now a wide net in their search for suspects. People both here and abroad are being brought in for questioning. At ground zero for the attacks, the search for survivors continues, but hope for finding anyone alive is fading and fast. And on another front, U.S. airspace reopened last hour to commercial and private flights, but only airports that meet these new tighter security guidelines are going to be allowed to reopen. New York's 3 airports are among those that have reopened on a limited basis, but just because planes are allowed to get back in the air, that does not mean that all airlines will be fully back in business right away. In Boston, Logan International Airport remains closed today. And one official says that airport will not reopen until it has met all of the enhanced security requirements required by the FAA. Now, you may recall 2 of the planes that were hijacked flew out of Logan Airport.
The investigation is unfolding into the attacks is unfolding on several fronts, including flight schools in Florida. Investigators are also looking at the records of students' trains at the flight schools. We'll have more on that story in a minute. Right now, we want to go to Capitol Hill. Richard Gephardt speaking. Let's listen in.
Showing the way and expecting that we would do that, and we are doing that, and we are responding. The resolution yesterday was the first response of the Congress. I thought the debate was moving and well done. Today we are working on dealing with other challenges, and we will continue to do that. Let me say one other thing, and then you can go to questions. In all my time in public service and in my whole life, I have not been part of such a severe challenge to this country. Terrorism is an action against humanity. It's an action against civilization. It's an action against everything this country stands for and is about. In dealing with this, we will not give up our freedom. We're going to have to change the balance between freedom and security, but we will not give up our freedom. We will not be defeated as to the basic values and ideas that underlie this country. And we will do that by standing together and having no air and no light between the President and the Congress and between the parties and the different viewpoints of this country.
You made several times today the point that you are standing shoulder to shoulder with the Republicans. You still, however, have substantial differences on the appropriations bill, the breadth of authority the President will have to decide how to spend the money that will be appropriated, and also the breadth of authority the President will have on deciding who to and how to respond to this attack. How do you resolve those differences?
By what we're doing.
Isn't there light and air between you and those?
No, we're working to resolve them in a collegial, collaborative way. I just left a meeting with the leadership in the House and Senate, the appropriators in the House and Senate, and we talked about resolving what, frankly, are important but not substantial differences that still may exist. I am confident that in the next hours we can work out those differences. The same thing is going on with regard to the authority that the President apparently wants to deal with this problem. And what you're seeing is real collaboration. What you're seeing is real working together. What you're seeing is real unity. And I said a number of times in the meeting, the people of our country are exhibiting incredible patriotism, heroism, bravery, and courage. They are working together to meet this challenge, just as we have at many times in our long history. And that's what we're doing inside this building and will do in the next hours and days to meet this challenge.
Does the President need authority from Congress, Mr. Gephardt? Get it out today.
We're hoping to be able to have the Congress, at least the House, if not the House and the Senate, be able to act today on a supplemental appropriation.
Mr. Gephardt, should there be a declaration of war?
My own thought is that the President has powers in present law to deal with what's in front of us. If the President wants and seeks additional authority or a restatement of present authority that's appropriate, we are quite willing to do that. We want to give him the tools that he needs and his administration needs to deal with this problem. We are behind that and we are for that. And we will work today and tomorrow, and if it takes Saturday and Sunday, we'll stay here and do what needs to be done to try to get these things done in a sensible, appropriate way.
But if he wants to launch an attack against somebody today, you believe he has the authority to do that under?
The President, under our Constitution, has the power to defend people in the United States, and I think he has the power to do something to retaliate against terrorism. We're in a new world. A lot of the concepts that we have dealt with in the past have been with the normal situation where one country attacks another or attacks the United States. When Pearl Harbor happened, the President asked for and got an authorization to use force against the country of Japan, and he was pledged by the Congress all of the resources that he needed in order to succeed in that effort. And then after that, we had a number of appropriation bills that gave him the resources that he needed. I've said before, this calamity caused what I think will be the greatest loss of life on American soil by an outside force in the history of the country. When it's finished, I'm fearful that the 2,400 or 2,500 lives that were lost at Pearl Harbor will be exceeded substantially. This was an enormous catastrophe. This was an enormous attack against the people of the United States, and I would say all the people of the world who love and honor civilization and humanity. And we must act in concert and together to give the President what the President needs and requires in order to get this done. We don't want to contravene our Constitution. We don't want to blur the various powers of our government. We don't want to, change the Constitution, and we don't have to do that. But what we have to do is work together internally in the Congress, with the Senate and the House, Democrats and Republicans, and then with the President to get the right things in law and the right things done so we can meet this challenge.
Will this be a declaration of war against the terrorists? Will Congress do a declaration of war against the terrorists?
It will be a piece of legislation which authorizes legally the president to take appropriate actions against the perpetrators of this giant atrocity.
Mr. Gephardt, the Ways and Means Committee chairman today unveiled legislation, an emergency stimulus package that would permanently cut the capital gains tax. Does that also have bipartisan support, and did he have any consultation with Democrats on that?
No, my understanding was they were working on legislation in Ways and Means that would take away the taxation of victims of let me try to finish. That would take away the taxation on victims of this atrocity. Now, if there are other matters that apply to all of our citizens that have broader ramifications, we'll obviously have to take a look at that. I was not aware of that. I'll look at it at the time that we should.
Once military response comes, it's going to be massive. It's going to cross international lines. Are you willing to support the president in any action he takes?
I support the president in his statement of the other day that unlike perhaps past policies, that we would try to find and bring to justice the perpetrators of this crime, but we would also take action against countries that harbor the perpetrators of this terrorism. I think that is an appropriate action to take. How that will be done, whether it will be done, is a question that has to yet be answered by what we find. But we have to be effective in facing down and dealing with this terrorism. Look, we've been faced with this for a number of years. This is not new. We've been talking about this problem for some time. This apparently was the work of a network of terrorists that may exist in a number of countries. We don't know the answers to all that. But what I do know is that unlike perhaps past times, we have to be effective in finally doing this in. What happened the other day, can never, ever happen again in this country. And in my view, in any country.
Should those funds for Star Wars
We've been listening to House Minority Leader Dick Gephardt as he addresses reporters talking about actions that he knows the House plans to take today, including voting and passing, he believes, a supplemental appropriation bill that would allow the president to have a large amount of money to go after the people that are believed to have carried out these acts. Also, an act authorizing the president to take appropriate actions against, as Mr. Gephardt said, the perpetrators of this attack. Let's bring in our congressional correspondent, Kate Snow, who can help us understand what exactly Congress is trying to do here. First of all, Kate, when Congressman Gephardt was talking about passing this authorization to take appropriate action, he stopped short of saying that this would be a declaration of war.
That's right. They're being very careful about the language. In fact, we understand there are meetings ongoing between the White House and congressional aides working on the language. We don't think that that particular resolution authorizing the use of military force, which is the way they're putting it, we don't think that will likely come up today, Darren. We think that it's probably going to be tomorrow, maybe even beyond tomorrow, before they work out all the language. This is a relatively new thing. The other resolution that you mentioned, the one that deals with money, now that one, they've just come out of a meeting. You heard him mention he was in a meeting with the other congressional leaders, that's the Speaker of the House and the Senate leaders, Republicans and Democrats, talking about this money. There is general consensus, Darren, that they want to send the president as much money as he thinks he needs. That they're talking about some $20 billion right now. That's what's been suggested by appropriators. I'm told that in that meeting, though, there was a lot of discussion about whether it's even appropriate to put a price tag on this right now. There's a lot of discussion about whether that's the right amount of money. There were some members from New York who were in the room who I'm told said, we need specific money for New York, and we also need the ability to consult with the president about how to spend this money. So there is a little bit of talking going on, but they do want to get this done ultimately today. Darren.
Which brings up an interesting point, Kate. When the Congressman Gephardt first came out, he was very clear to talk about the unity, saying that there's no air, there's no light between this Congress and between the president. And yet, as reporters were asking, and you're kind of alluding to as well, Washington's a partisan town, and everyone's going to have an opinion as to how this money should be spent and what action should be taken.
That's right. It is. And when he was asked about an economic stimulus package, which has been mentioned by Republicans as a way to send a signal to Wall Street, which means tax cuts, you start to get into the politics. But Darren, I think the bottom line here is these people are human too. I had a long talk with Dick Gephardt this morning about his feelings and his emotions. He told me he's been bursting into tears watching some of the coverage. The man you just saw has been bursting into tears watching some of the coverage. So I think there is a unanimity. There's a feeling here on Capitol Hill. They have to do what the president wants them to do. One other thing I wanted to mention, they passed a resolution this morning in the House asking every American to fly the American flag for the next 30 days. Darren?
I think that's something a lot of people would like to follow. Quickly, as we wrap, give us a quick civics lesson, and our viewers, does the House just vote on the amount of money, or does it have to go by the Senate as well?
It's going to be done by both the House and the Senate, but this is a rare occurrence on Capitol Hill. They're going to take it up at the same time, and it's the same language, the same bill, the same piece of paper will be passed by both chambers, sent to the president, and as I say, they hope to do that by later today.
Right. Darren. Kate Snow on Capitol Hill, thanks for explaining what's taking place there. Leon.
Well, I've been keeping my eye on something that's taking place right now at George Washington Hospital Center. President Bush has been there visiting those who have been injured in the plane crash into the Pentagon a couple of days ago, and the families of those people there. The shot we have there, we just saw moments ago, Communications Director Karen Hughes walk out along with Karl Rove. And we expect President Bush will be walking out of there any moment now. President Bush is there visiting those in the hospital along with First Lady Laura Bush. And we've also just learned that the First Lady has granted an interview to CNN's senior White House correspondent John King. And they'll be talking live this afternoon right here on CNN at 1 p.m. Eastern. There you see President Bush stopping there momentarily, talking to those are members of the press there immediately around that doorway. So I don't think he's speaking to anyone in the general public out there. But the comments he has made this morning show that this has really touched him on a deep level. He was very emotional this morning in the Oval Office speaking to the press before he went over to this George Washington Hospital Center, with tears welling in his eyes. The president said that I weep and mourn with America, he said, and he wishes he could comfort every single family whose lives have been affected. But make no mistake about it, my resolve is steady and strong about winning this war that has been declared on America. He says also, I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it. This is a terrible moment, but this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
Leon, it was an interesting peek inside the White House that we had. I think it was just over an hour ago. First, we got to see live the president holding a conference call with the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, and the governor of that state. And we got to basically eavesdrop in on that conversation. And then he turned around and started answering questions to the reporters who were with him. And while we were watching that he did appear to become more and more emotional, not out of control, but you could just see his eyes became a little bit more glassy, and as he talked more and he became angrier at the situation, you could see his emotions rising as well.
Now, he just stopped there for an impromptu press conference there to talk with the members of the press that have been following him, and we've got someone in that press pool, and I want to hear what they have to say about, or what they heard him say just moments ago. And as that moment that those comments you happen to mention there that got him so emotional in the White House, even after all of that, he went on to talk about the fact that war had been declared on the U.S., and he says that they fully understand. He's talking about the folks that he had talked to in building a coalition about this. He was speaking to Middle Eastern leaders as well as leaders in Europe and NATO, saying that they all fully understand that an act of war was declared on the United States of America, and they understand as well that act could have easily been declared on them. And he says that is what has steeled his resolve.
Yeah, and an interesting confluence of pictures to go from that then to see his father, the 41st President of the United States, President Bush, former President Bush, speaking to a group in Boston. We got to listen to his comments as well.
We have another picture.
Another picture. This time we want to check in Milwaukee.
Jeff Flock,
That's where we find our Jeff Flock. Jeff.
Yes, we have begun a trip around this country, taking a look at what people are thinking and saying out here in the rest of the U.S. Obviously, the focus has been to the east, We want to take a look at the rest of it. We are taking stop one at Marquette University. This is Professor McCormick's class. It's comparative politics, and this is what's on everyone's mind. You've been watching things unfold, and first I want to get hands. How many people saw live on television either planes crashing into buildings or towers collapsing? How many people saw something of it unfold live? Amazing. Almost the entire class watched this happen. What was going through your mind then, and what is now today, 3 days later?
I was pretty scared because I just got done with the ROTC physical training, and I came in, and my grandma just called me, and I just bought my airplane ticket yesterday, and she told me that, 2 planes had just crashed, and I looked up the news. They just had an instant replay of the plane the second one just going right through. What are your fears today, as we are now some ways down the road? Where do we go next from here?
My fears are that it's not over. My fears are that, somebody's going to come by surprise and totally do something that's just as destructive to the entire nation.
How many people are worried about that, or worried about future terrorist attacks? I guess pretty much everybody. Going through your mind?
I'm quite nervous because I'm a frequent flyer from Milwaukee to Boston, and I find it highly disturbing that somebody was able to breach the security at an airport like Logan.
Are people really surprised about that? I mean, how many people, give me some sense, were really shocked about this, about what took place? Yes, hang on, let me get to you with a microphone.
This isn't something that happens in real life. This is like something that you would see on a movie such as Die Hard or Speed. It was like a special effect from a studio.
I know we've got somebody here who's planning to, is it you that's planning to travel tomorrow? Yes. Tell me about that.
Well, my flight's leaving tomorrow, and
good luck getting off.
I know. Beginning of the week, when this first happened, I was thinking, it should be back to normal by maybe Thursday, today, or Friday. But with everything, I see that flights are supposedly resuming, but for the people that were laid over on Tuesday. And I'm just curious as to whether I'm going to get home or when, or what's going to happen with all the new regulations in the airports.
Obviously, we were talking about that earlier, the impact on our society. I want to bring Professor McCormick in. What's your greatest fear about this? You've got more perspective than some of these people in the class.
I really hope that this incident doesn't shake our values. We're a free nation that stands for freedom and justice for all, and I hope we can stick to that.
Any other fears out there? Do people have similar fears? Yes, go ahead.
Well, you hear everyone talking about how we have to get back to normal and we have to get back on with our lives, but my biggest fear is that, the very definition of normalcy is going to change now, forever.
Life as we know it is going to be different. How so? Anybody? How so? How so is it going to be different?
Well, we as an American nation, we don't know war as a daily thing. I think that we're going to have a hard time adjusting to a war society instead of our normal going to work, going home every day.
Before we get away, we've heard a lot, we're at war. How many people feel we are at war right now? How many not? Just both sides? Why?
I don't think we're at war because we don't know who we're fighting. We can't go to war when we don't have a specific enemy that we're going after. So we're kind of in a pre-war stage. I think we will go to war, but we're not there yet.
Is that what you're thinking over there, that war is coming one way or another?
I think we're already at war. They took the step of assaulting large numbers of civilian populations, and the fact of the matter is we have to wipe out terrorism as it exists now. That's the only choice we have, or else this will keep happening. Better to do it now than when they have nuclear weapons in 5 years.
Yeah, but hang on before we get away here. Yes, go ahead.
I think that war is more than just troops on the battlefield or missiles being thrown. It's more of a state of mind. I mean, that's also a part of it, and I think we've taken that first step, and definitely people have that state of mind already.
I don't know which is more scary, the state of mind or the real thing.
My biggest fear is that our response. War today is way different than war was 40 years ago. I mean, just the technology has totally changed the way that it will be, and that's my biggest fear.
Yeah, I hear that. A lot of fears about the response, whatever it is, whenever it is. Yes?
I think that we were left with little choice. Either they have to turn over bin Laden or whoever's responsible for this, or we just have to go in there and get them. I think that's what we're left with.
Anybody get a sense of what it is? What do we have to do? What do we have to... yeah, let me get to you. Hang on one second.
Well, I have heard some people saying that perhaps we shouldn't respond because it would make the terrorists angry and perhaps make them want to do something more. But I think we have to remember that they're already angry with us and they've already done something. And I think we have no choice but to respond to that.
Anybody else on that topic? Yeah, up here. Hang on.
I agree, but I also think that another reason why we have to respond is otherwise we'll look weak in the face of terrorism.
Anybody got fears about that? Looking weak and what that may lead to down the road? Anybody? Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, go ahead. You right here.
Yes, if we don't do something, this is going to make America look weak, and this will just open ourselves up to further attacks.
Anybody got the other side of that? Anybody with the other viewpoint on that? Concerned about what the impact will be if the response is too strong, that perhaps itself leads to a worse situation?
If we are going to blow up a country, as some people have suggested, what will that do with the other countries around them, their allies? Will we get attacked by more people and more attacks throughout the world, our heartland?
Good question.
I think we're basically one of the strongest countries out there, and that our forces or whatever we use to take care of this problem it's going to be substantially good no matter how much or how less we use, just because our power is looked at by so many countries, and it's just a basis that we do something.
Sir, that's going to have to be the final word. We very much appreciate it. Thanks to you all. Mr. McCormick's class, Professor McCormick, thank you so much. Appreciate it here. We will continue our travels around this country to give you some sense of what is going on out here in the rest of the country. That's the latest from Marquette University in Milwaukee. Back to you, folks.
Boy.
Jeff, yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks
Good to hear from the young people, and thank the professor as well.
Yeah, the comments like these kids are making the same comments we've been hearing all over the place. Folks are thinking on the same page in this country. All right, let's check in now with our Brian Palmer, who's at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York, a hospital that has seen much of the carnage created by this nasty terrorist activity. Let's go to Brian now live. He's got some you have some updated information for us now, Brian?
Indeed, we were just updated by spokesman Mark Ackerman on the current situation here at St. Vincent's Hospital and Medical Center.
Here at our Manhattan facility, and one die at St. Vincent's in Staten Island. There have been a total of 83 fire and police individuals cared for here in Manhattan, and we've had 95 admissions. We're pleased that a number of those people who have been admitted here in Manhattan have been discharged and are now home resting comfortably with their families.
Now, in addition, the hospital's medical director, Dr. Anthony Gagliardi, said that 11 patients had been seen since last night, mostly emergency personnel with cuts and abrasions. The spokesman announced that a website is still under construction that would list patients' names on a citywide basis, being put together by the Greater New York Hospitals Association and the city's Office of Emergency Management. But it's still not online. They said that there are other websites out there listing patient names. They're well-intentioned, the spokesman said, but not necessarily accurate. Now, we'd like to show you some rather compelling video that's slightly more upbeat. It's a reunion of two World Trade Center workers who were trapped in the rubble together. They couldn't see each other, but they were trapped in the rubble. Marlena Cruz, who is a carpenter at the World Trade Center, and Artie Del Bianco, a 20-year veteran of the World Trade Center, an operations engineer. Mr. Del Bianco could hear Marlena Cruz calling to him in the rubble. His leg was crushed, but they got back together.
That is fantastic. Thank you very much, Brian Palmer, reporting to us there from St. Vincent's Hospital in New York. We take you now to Washington, folks, now for the latest briefing by the Undersecretary of Defense there at the Pentagon.
Make no mistake about it, we will win. As a first step in that direction, the President yesterday sent to the Congress a request for a $20 billion emergency supplemental for the year 2001, and I'm here just to sketch in broadest terms our thinking on that supplemental. It's government-wide. It's not just the Defense Department, but obviously a very great portion of those needs are to prepare our armed forces for whatever the President may ask them to do. There are obviously other needs as well. There are needs of the victims, both here and in New York. There's rebuilding to be done both here and in New York. There are costs already incurred with combat air patrols that have been maintained over a significant number of American cities, including Washington. The costs mount rapidly, and they will mount more rapidly as this campaign develops. We appreciate the indications we've had from the Congress of strong support for this request, and we, of course, will work very closely with the Congress as we develop the details of how this money may be used. I think the most important point to stress is that this is a message to those who support terrorism that the United States is serious about the President's words. This is an indication of America's purpose, a projection of our will, and I think it's a message to friends and adversaries alike that this is a completely different ballgame that we're in now. Be happy to take questions, but I'm probably going to not get into a lot of details. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, how much of this $20 billion is for, first of all, for the military, and how much involves cleanup and current operations, as you say, such as AirCap, and how much involves preparing the military to strike back? Can you give us any sense of how much involves preparing for strike back?
I don't think we know the breakdown yet, partly because the needs are so enormous. It basically includes all of the above, and not, as I said, not just for the Defense Department. There is help for the victims and their families. I mean, even things as simple as DOD mortuary teams that have gone up to New York to help with the disaster up there. You've seen the disaster in this building, and we still have major work to do. But obviously a significant piece of this is going to be to bring our armed forces to the highest level of preparedness to be able to execute whatever it is the President may ask them to do.
How much of the $20 billion would be for the armed forces?
That remains to be worked out.
Well, it has not been.
No.
Secretary Wolfowitz, it kind of rolls off the tongue pretty well, sustained and broad against terrorism, but doing it, most people concede, is a totally different issue. According to the polls, the American public supports military action against those who conducted the attack on Tuesday. But what do you hit, and how do you go after it? If it is Osama bin Laden or somebody comparable, there don't seem to be any hard targets, nothing comparable to the damage done here. What kind of a war do you wage?
Well, I think we're going to see how this unfolds, and it's going to unfold over time. I think one thing is clear, is that you don't do it with just a single military strike, no matter how dramatic. You don't do it with just military forces alone. You do it with the full resources of the U.S. government. It will be a campaign, not a single action. And we're going to keep after these people and the people who support them until this stops. And it has to be treated that way. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, what support will you be getting from the allies in this effort? NATO has expressed support. Are you talking with your Russian counterparts? Will we see a different alliance
I think the
striking
whole
at terrorism?
civilized world has been shocked by what's happened, and even some elements of the uncivilized world have begun to wonder whether maybe they're on the wrong side here. The President's been in close contact with a number of world leaders, including our allies, including President Putin of Russia, including our friends in the Middle East, in the Gulf region. I think everyone understands that we have unfortunately entered a new era. We're all going to be tested. We're going to be coming to each one of them, I'm sure, with a variety of different requests. Some of those are being developed. Many more we're going to develop as we proceed. And I think so far we've seen indications from a wide variety of sources that people will step up when asked. And believe me, they will be asked. Yes.
And does this mean there's an end to any kind of drawdown of the military?
I'm not sure which drawdown you were referring to. We were talking in the context of the QDR about major investments to build up our military for the next decade. I think what this means is there are also going to be some huge requirements to build up our military for the next year and maybe longer. Yes?
Yes, Mr. Secretary, you have a quadrennial defense review that's due to Congress in just a few weeks, and certainly this changes the whole perspective of it. It changes everything from the programs that you're going to put your money in. Do you still intend on meeting that September 30th deadline, or what do you plan on doing with the quadrennial defense review?
I don't think a final decision's been made on that. I wouldn't agree that it changes everything. It changes a great deal, and as I just said in answer to the previous question, we now have requirements that we didn't contemplate 2 weeks ago. But I don't think that means that the requirements that we contemplated for 10 and 15 years from now are necessarily all that different. Yes.
Sir, question about the budget process as it stood on Monday before the incidents. Have you or anyone else at OSD level issued different guidance, different directions today or yesterday as to the disposition of the development of the next POM cycle and budget as a result of the tragedy? And can you give us any visibility about where you stand in building that next fiscal perspective for the military buildup that you've discussed? Have you put that down in writing to the forces?
Well, as I think you probably understand, because it's a well-informed question, that the budget process is a great big machine and you don't sort of turn it on or off or steer it quickly. And I think that machine continues to work in a lot of fine-grained detail on our out-year requirements. Clearly, there are going to be a whole range of new requirements, and we are already working with the services and defense agencies to start to identify a range of what those near-term requirements may be. As you probably realize, this $20 billion is 01 money, and so it doesn't even begin to address the question of amended requirements for 02 and beyond. We are in a different era. I think the President has made that clear, the Secretary of Defense has made it clear. Everything is going to change, but we hope that with this $20 billion initial move forward, that particularly our enemies will get a message, and the people who have to be with us will get a message as well that we're serious.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
The President has said that the United States intends to find those who were responsible for these attacks and hold them accountable. But he and others, including you today, have also spoken about a much broader campaign that would seem to go beyond, in terms of targets, beyond those that may have been responsible for this particular attack. How should we look at that?
Well, I think the President's words are pretty good, so let me say, these people try to hide, but they won't be able to hide forever. They think their harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. I think one has to say it's not just simply a matter of capturing people and holding them accountable, but removing the sanctuaries, removing the support systems, ending states who sponsor terrorism, and that's why it has to be a broad and sustained campaign. It's not going to stop if a few criminals are taken care of. Yes.
Do you anticipate, I mean, given the devastation in New York, I mean, $20 billion looks like it's just going to be a down payment on repairing what was destroyed. Do you anticipate having to shift around any of DoD's internal resources in the 2002 budget to cover some of the bill here and to begin work on any of the kind of anti-terrorism or counterterrorism?
I anticipate, and the indications from the Congress are that my anticipation is well-founded, that we will have new additional resources to cover not only the damage that has been inflicted, but to start to begin to build the military capability we need for other options. So I don't envision shifting resources around, as your question implies.
So the money that you all have asked for now would stay where it is, and then you expect to get additional resources in the 2002 budget for added work restoration.
That's my expectation. Yes. Over here.
Secretary Mineta talked today about his request to put military personnel aboard civilian airliners when they start flying again and to supplement the Scud Marshall program. Have you received that request from the Transportation Department, and do you think that's one you're going to be able to take on now?
I'm not sure what Secretary Mineta said. The question of marshals is a complicated one. The question of putting U.S. military personnel who may or may not be trained in law enforcement techniques on planes is a difficult one. We're obviously going to work with the Transportation Department and with the FBI and the Marshal Service and anyone who can use our expertise to provide what capabilities are needed, but it is a complicated issue. Yes, indeed.
Just to follow on that question, if I could, Secretary Mineta also said that he was going to request personnel from Delta Force to come in and train air marshals in a speedy fashion to get them up and running quickly. I'm assuming, I guess, that you have not received such a request. Are you willing to entertain such a request? Is this something that would be appropriate for the Defense Department?
There's definitely been discussion, and I don't know whether you want to get into a semantic discussion about what's a request, what's not a request. What is needed, and I think we all agree on it, is a plan for training up civilian air marshals, and if U.S. military expertise is useful in that, obviously we want to make it available. At the same time, this is fundamentally a civil function. It doesn't require all the exotic training that Delta Force members have. And on the other hand, it requires law enforcement training that our people don't have. So we're going to be working closely. I hope you understand, I mean, there's a great deal that we're improvising here as we go. We're trying to improvise as fast as we possibly can.
Looking at that may or may not be deemed appropriate. There may be some other avenue that would be more desirable.
I think the exact way forward hasn't been decided yet. Yes, and back.
As a follow-up, you said some of the money will be to start to build the military capability we need. We've been identifying terrorism as a threat now for 10 years. What is it that you envision when you say that? What is the capability that we don't have that we need?
The capabilities to sustain. We have an enormous capability. That's no secret. But it's also no secret. Go back 10 years, we had enormous capability when we actually deployed several 100,000 troops for Desert Storm. We needed sustainment, we needed munitions, we needed logistics, we needed fuel, we needed things that you don't plan for because you don't plan for that level of operations on a day-to-day basis. So across...
We want to break into the Undersecretary's briefing to bring in this tape that's happening right now that we saw moments ago, and it's the first time we've seen this tape.
Met with their families. This is a great hospital. The doctors and nurses are not only accomplished, they're loving people. There's a wonderful spirit up on the floor that we went to. We told them that our country's praying for each and every one there. We're praying for their families. Some of the folks could talk, and they described the horror of the incident in the moment. They talked about escaping, going through fire, and crawling through debris. That it's clear that they were fighting for their survival then, and like every patient up there, they're still fighting for their survival. And it's just a sobering moment for Laura and me, but we're, again, thank the hospital, the docs, the nurses, and of course, again, tell the families that the nation prays for those who have been injured during this unbelievable act of terror. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Let's go. Head to the motorcade, guys.
Now, if you're watching live here about maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes ago or so, we saw this scene from a different perspective when President Bush and First Lady Laura Bush walked out of the George Washington Center Hospital there, and we were wondering what had gone on with that impromptu press conference where he stopped on the curb. That was it, and you're seeing that tape for the first time as we saw that tape for the first time. Let's check in now with our senior White House correspondent, John Kay. John?
Well, Leon, that scene outside the Washington Medical Center, one of the snapshots we have seen just in the past few hours, never mind the past 2 days, of the many emotions and the many challenges facing not only the president but the First Lady as well at this very difficult moment. The president went to the hospital along with Laura Bush to visit 11 victims, those among the most seriously injured when that plane crashed into the Pentagon. He left the White House to go to the hospital just moments after a telephone call to both the governor of New York and New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. In that phone call, the president promised them the full support of the federal government in the recovery efforts, and he also announced that he will indeed leave Washington and visit New York tomorrow to get a first-hand look not only at the devastation caused by these terrorist attacks, but also to go up there and check in on the relief and recovery effort. Now, in that conference call, the president also talked of his efforts to deal with this. The investigation is underway. We know from sources that the U.S. government, Mr. Bush, in his conversations with National Security Team, already considering potential military options to respond to this. Mr. Bush, in a conversation with reporters after that phone call, alluded to that, saying this is the first war of the 21st century, he said, and the United States, he promised, would respond.
Make no mistake about it, my resolve is steady and strong about winning this war that has been declared on America. It's a new kind of war. And I understand it's a new kind of war. And this government will adjust. And this government will call others to join us to make sure this act, these acts, the people who conducted these acts and those who harbor them are held accountable for their actions.
The president there showing his resolve as commander-in-chief, but it was just a few minutes later that the president teared up when talking to reporters about another responsibility of the president, any president at a moment of crisis like this. Mr. Bush talking about his efforts not only to console, but also to reassure the nation.
I think about the families, the children. I'm a loving guy. And I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do. And I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
Thank you. Thank you. Now at this hour, senior Bush aides in negotiations with key members of Congress, as we have been reporting, on a resolution that would back the use of force, put the Congress on the record, backing the use of military force to retaliate for these terrorist attacks. Also expected, hoped for on the president's desk by the end of the day, an emergency supplemental bill providing a down payment, $20 billion, to help pay for some of the recovery efforts, the early investigative efforts. And after 2 days of often numbing pictures, incomprehensible things happening across the country, just moments ago when we were in that Pentagon briefing, the Undersecretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz explaining what some of that money would go for. He said it matter-of-factly. Some of it would go to help pay for combat air patrols over Washington, D.C. and other major American cities. Unthinkable just a few days ago, but now U.S. fighter jets flying over the Capitol and other major cities as well, as a result of the changing times forced by these deadly terrorist attacks. Leon?
All right, John, before we let you go, we understand that you're going to be coming up in about 14 minutes or so from now. You're going to be sitting down and talking with the First Lady, correct?
That's right. First Lady Laura Bush, this had been scheduled to be a week in which she stepped out discussing more her efforts to promote literacy and education. Instead, of course, she was at the United States Capitol when the terrorist attacks took place, rushed by the Secret Service to a secure location. Just today, she sent a letter to school children, school superintendents around the country, asking that it be read to school children. The First Lady trying to step up in a very consoling, reassuring way to speak to the American people and urging parents to take some time to talk to their children about all the horror we have seen in the past few days. I will discuss those efforts with her and her husband's handling of this crisis in just a few minutes here at the White House.
All right, good deal. Thank you very much, John. John King at the White House. We'll get back to you then. Darren, over to you.
Of course, one of the big stories of the day, the nation's airports beginning to reopen. In some airports across the country, especially up and down the East Coast, that is going to be an eerie experience. I'm thinking of Washington Dulles Airport. This is where American Airline Flight 77 originated on Tuesday morning. It was supposed to go to Los Angeles. Instead, it ended up crashing into the Pentagon. Let's go ahead and check in with our Kathleen Koch. She is standing by at Dulles. Kathleen, let's start with the question, is this airport open for business today?
Indeed it is, Darren. About 45 minutes ago, we actually saw the first commercial aircraft take off. It was a Delta aircraft, empty though, only had crew on board. It was headed actually there to Atlanta to position itself for the resumption of flights nationwide. Now, only a few seconds ago, we saw the first commercial aircraft land here. So gradually, bit by bit, things are beginning to get back to normal. However, around the airport, you can see that security is very tight. We have seen armed U.S. Marshals positioned in various areas around the airport. Outside the airport, when you pull up, you see that there are huge concrete barriers, Jersey, the entire terminal. Now, inside at the American Airlines ticket counter, the police tape has now been removed. Last night, there were about 12 FBI agents in there. They were dusting the counter for fingerprints and checking it. All that now is gone. So there is, again, a feeling that things are beginning to get back to normal. But as Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta pointed out again this morning.
Kathleen, I'm sorry, we're going to have to interrupt you. You want to go live to Washington, D.C. A news conference is beginning now. Attorney General John Ashcroft and by his side FBI Director Robert Mueller. Let's listen in.
Was a day of unspeakable violence and outrage, but also a day of heroism and sacrifice. As endangered men and women struggled to make their way out of burning, collapsing buildings, firemen and policemen, emergency rescue personnel struggled to make their way in to those structures. Many, and we don't know how many yet, never made it out of the buildings. Even as we continue to hold out hope that more of these brave Americans will be found alive, It is my duty as Attorney General to begin to process the provision of relief to the families of public safety officers who sacrificed so that others might survive the attacks of September the 11th. The Public Safety Officers Benefits Act of 1976 provides for approximately $150,000 in benefits to the families of law enforcement officers, firemen, emergency response squad members, ambulance crew members who are killed in the line of duty. This morning, the President of the United States, President George W. Bush, directed me immediately to implement procedures and approval processes of claims for benefits under this act. Pursuant to the President's directive, the Department of Justice this morning has taken the following actions to expedite the delivery of benefits to public safety officers' families. First, the existing regulations under the Public Safety Officers Benefits Act requires that officers' families and employing agencies fill out individual forms certifying that the officer was killed in the line of duty and that no disqualifying circumstances were present, and that the officer was in fact related to the family members seeking the benefits. These regulations direct the Bureau of Justice Assistance in the Justice Department to give substantial weight to evidence presented by federal, state, and local agencies and to resolve in favor of payment any reasonable doubt concerning the circumstances of the officer's permanent disability or death. In view of the unprecedented loss of life and the debilitating injuries to public safety officers, I have directed, pursuant to the President's request, that this process be streamlined in this case. I am directing the Office of Justice Programs to exercise the full scope of its direction and its discretion under the statute and regulations to accept applications, consider evidence justifying claims, and to process prompt payment of benefits. In cases in which benefits are sought by survivors of officers killed in the line of duty on September 11, I am directing that blanket certifications from executives of public safety agencies be considered as evidence of eligibility without requiring further individualized documentation. In addition, the family claim form will be abbreviated and streamlined. Secondly, the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs is immediately making available additional resources to see that the claims of fallen officers' families are processed as quickly as possible. Staff are being brought to New York from a variety of other settings to assist in case processing. Second, a separate computer database is being established to expedite and monitor the case processing. Third, lawyers from the Office of Justice Programs are immediately reviewing all cases from New York to make sure that those cases move as quickly as possible. Office of Justice Programs, fourth, staff members are being sent to New York to assist with family contacts and the assembly of claim packages, including the gathering of pertinent records. The Office of Justice Program representatives will be available on site, if requested, to pre-certify claim packages in terms of the completeness of those packages. These representatives will also work with the Treasury Department to expedite the payments to families once claims are approved. The provision of benefits is an insufficient but a necessary response on behalf of the American people to the unknown number of individuals who fought fires, law enforcement officers, and medical rescue personnel who died answering the call of their fellow citizens on September the 11th. It is President Bush's and my hope that the actions that we have taken today will provide a measure of relief to the husbands and wives and children that have been left behind. I know that it is the nation's hope that this assistance will stand as a gesture of the inexpressible gratitude that so many Americans feel as well as a small tribute to the honor of the sacrifice of those who were willing to lose their lives so that others might be saved. Additionally, today I announced with the Treasury Department a step that has been taken to provide additional security at airports across the country. As airports reopen and as travel is resumed, there will be substantially increased security presence, on the ground at designated security checkpoints throughout the country. The Departments of Justice and Treasury have deployed hundreds of U.S. Marshals, individuals from the U.S. Marshal Service, U.S. Border Patrol, and U.S. Customs officials as part of a broad effort by federal law enforcement authorities to provide a larger police presence at airports in addition to the heightened security procedures already put into effect. We will take all precautions necessary to protect American travelers. Finally, our nation calls on us in times like this to be at our best. If we are to prevail in difficult times like this, we must be at our best. Since Tuesday, the Justice Department has received reports of violence and threats of violence against Arab Americans and other Americans of Middle Eastern and South Asian descent. We must not descend to the level of those who perpetrated Tuesday's violence by targeting individuals based on race, religion, or national origin. Such reports of violence and threats are in direct opposition to the very principles and laws for which the United States of America stands, and such reports of violence and threats of violence will not be tolerated. I now have a few updates with regard to the ongoing investigation. Legal attaches of the FBI around the world are receiving enormous cooperation from law enforcement authorities in the host countries that are cooperating with us to assist us in following up on leads. We have also received numerous offers of help from other countries if we need those elements of assistance, and we are grateful for the assistance that has been offered and the assistance that has been rendered. With regard to federal law enforcement personnel casualties, there is an FBI agent assigned to the New York field office who remains missing. 3 U.S. Marshals who are assigned to the Southern District of New York sustained minor injuries. We are also in the process of collecting information nationwide regarding the loss of life and casualties among law enforcement personnel. As of this morning, the FBI's Leads hotline has received 2,055 phone calls. Some of these leads have been helpful to the investigation. The website, which was opened virtually immediately after the crisis, has received more than 22,700 suggested tips. The FBI is working thousands and thousands of leads. As of this moment, none of the black boxes has been recovered yet. However, we believe retrieval of the black box at the Somerset County location is the most feasible in the short term. Last but not least, the total number of hijackers, to our best estimate and our best knowledge given the information at this time, on the 4 planes that crashed was at least 18, unless contradicted by evidence which we wouldn't anticipate. 2 planes had 5 hijackers and 2 other planes had 4 hijackers each. The director of the FBI, Mr. Mueller, is here with me, and we would be pleased to respond to your questions.
All the hijackers, were they ticketed passengers? And if not, do you know how they got on the planes?
Yes, they were ticketed passengers.
Are you convinced, based on the evidence in Florida and Boston and elsewhere, that the Biden was or may have been behind this?
I'm not prepared to identify or to comment on persons ultimately responsible at this time.
How many people at this point are detained around the country, and why are these potential accomplices, Mr. Director, of such concern to the Bureau?
Well, I can't give you a specific number. What has happened, as I indicated yesterday, that we're, as a result of following up leads, we're interviewing a number of people. And in the course of doing those interviews, we find that a number of the individuals, when asked for identification and the like, are out of status. And when we find somebody out of status, we quite obviously bring in the INS and they are detained. And that is the policy and procedures we're following.
And they're a concern to you regarding the investigation?
Some may be concerned to us and some may not after we interview them.
What sort of indication do you have of other operations being aborted?